Well, hey everybody, so today we're going to be using the Marquee tools and the lasso tools to affect a sort of symmetry to a portrait. Now it's one of those things where it's a somewhat, let's say, necessarily understood thing, but you'll notice sometimes if you look at a face and the face is perfectly symmetrical, that face stands out to you because symmetry in a person's face is rather rather rare. Most people have something going on, just not necessarily in terms of like blemishes or marks, but rather the way their face sort of naturally sits. It changes. It's a little different on one side or the other. It doesn't even have to be like a less hair on one eyebrow or like a mark on the side of your nose. More so, whenever you look straight, one eyebrow is lifted higher than the other, and one eye sits lower than the other. This is not a mark on anybody necessarily at all, but it is definitely one of those things that if you were to look at a person's face and affect a sort of forced symmetry, you would see how that stands out. So we have two portraits of a man and a woman, and we're just going to put them back into Photoshop. We can drag them in, drop them. You download these off of D2L. And we're just going to show, we'll start off with the man here. The first thing we want to do with this, let's kind of zoom in a little bit. If you hold on the Alt key and you roll up the scroll wheel, you can zoom in. And at any time, if you want to sort of fit the whole thing to the screen, you can always go to View and go to sort of fit on screen here, or press Control-0 on your keyboard. So what we'll do is we'll just get to where we can see all the face, and I'm going to create just a rectangular marquee. I'm going to see if I can't get it to go as close to the center as I possibly can here. So I'm just going to do this right here. I'm just going to go down this person's face like so, and I'm going to go over to my layers here. I'm going to I'll make sure that my background's selected. And I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to say layer via copy. And so if I were to just sort of get rid of the background, I would see that right there. Now, with this right here, we've got a couple options of how we could get rid of the stuff we don't really want. Because all we want to do is just keep his face. So I'll keep his beard, and I'll keep part of his neck as well. But I don't really need anything else because it'll start to sort of interfere with the rest of the image here. So what we'll do is we'll take our eraser tool, and we want to make sure our eraser tool has its hardness set to 0%. So click on your hardness, little brush icon up here at the top, and make sure it's 0%. I'm going to shrink this down slightly because this is a smaller picture than we might be used to. I'm sure we need 45 or so. And I'm just going to take my eraser, and I'm just going to erase around, and we don't have to be too terribly precise with this because it's got a soft edge to it. So I'm just going to erase as much as I feel comfortable with, trying to get his face isolated here, and that should do it. Alright, so what we'll do now is we will bring the background, well actually what we'll do is this, we will take our Marquee tool here, and we're going to right click on the face, and we're going to find the Free Transform tool. If we click on the Free Transform tool, we can right click on it, and we can flip this horizontally. And I'll bring back the face here. So I'll actually press this little check mark here to accept the changes. And I'll bring back the face, and I'll use my move tool to see if I can't move it in position here. About there, say. And we'll see if we can't match it up as best we can. And at some point, you'll notice, let's think here, his mouth was sort of set a little sideways, so it's possible we'll have to get rid of some bits of the mouth to make this blend in. So I think I'll put it right about there, and I'm going to take my eraser tool once again and see if I can erase. First off, I'm going to erase this really harsh line that's down the middle. I'm just going to send my eraser tool right down the middle, trying to kind of get rid of that little, and sort of blend that in, and I'll just continue on like this until I can get this matched up well. And I'll do the same thing down for the neck somewhat. Okay. There's still a pretty obvious line there. Well, no, that's just the shadow falling on his face. Alright, so what we'll do is this. I'm going to, before I do, I'll go ahead and save this, and I'll save this in my Portrait Symmetry folder. I'll call this man, I'll just I'll save that. And it'll save as a PSD. Then I'm going to press File, Save As, I'm going to save this as a JPEG, and I'm going to call it, in this case, we copied the right side of his face. Now, obviously, it's on our left, but if he were looking at us, it would be the right side of his face. There's a bit of a, I would say, bit of a interesting kind of thing going on with his mouth there, but that's okay. We can kind of see how that looks. So man, and I'll call this man right symmetry. And I'll press save, and I'll just press OK here. All right, so I'll just render this invisible by clicking this little eye icon there, and I'll just basically do the same thing again. I'll take my Marquee tool, and I'll just select the left side of his face instead of the right side of his face. And I'll see if I can't line up in the center here. Now, once again, his mouth is somewhat off-center. He's sort of making a face there, and that's okay. We can work around that. And I'll just right-click on this and say Layer via Copy. And what I'll do now is I'll, with my Marquee tool still selected, I'll just right-click, Pre-Transform, right-click, Flip Horizontal, and I'll just do the eraser tool in a second. I'll see if I can't pull this over to the side and see if I can't match this up right here with the side of his face. And we can start using our eraser tool. Press Enter to changes here. I might move this slightly over. I'll press the eraser tool here, and I'll start erasing some of this information down here, so where we can, because he was sort of shifting his shoulders slightly, and I'll see if I can't just pull this together, and we can sort of see the difference here. Oops, I'm erasing too much, and now suddenly there's a bit of a shadow that's formed on both sides of his face that's not quite showing up. All right, so here, I think I might need to move this a little bit further in, just to blend the shadows together, and then from there, maybe take off some of this here. And this is where our dodge and burn tool will come in handy, because what we'll do here is we'll sneak behind on the background layer, and I'll start using the burn tool. In fact, I'm just going to right click and say duplicate layer, press OK, have a background copy there, and I'll just use my burn tool here to darken everything a bit. So I'll find my burn tool, and I'm going to say if I can't, let's look here, this is the burn tool here, and I'll get the shadows to come up a good deal. So I'll just it appears we've got some information here that we need to get rid of. All right, so I'll just go back up here, and I'll just my eraser tool, and I'll just run this right up the middle there, where there's not such a harsh line. And we'll see if we can't get that burn tool back. So you can see that oftentimes these experiments with symmetry are best done with someone who is making a sort of a neutral face, and is in definitely neutral lighting. So when you do your own, you'll take your own portrait here. Oops, wrong layer. Make sure you're on the right layer too. That's a good important tip here. So on the background layer, I'm going to use my burn tool, the background layer back here, and I'll just also use the sponge tool to desaturate that slightly to make it blend in a bit better. That looks good. Right. And we could always run back over with the eraser if we need to erase anything else. So right here we've got a bit of the blue wall. It's kind of interfering with his neck, so I'll just search my eraser tool, and I'll just tap that here on the. That's good. Okay, and there's still a bit of a. Use my dodge tool to lighten this area up by his nose. Use the sponge tool here to fix that. There we go. That brings it to a bit more under control. Alright, and what we'll do is we'll press File, and we'll press Save As, and we'll say, bring this into a JPEG, and we'll call this Man Left Symmetry. Alright, save. And we can actually look at these and kind of compare them side by side. So we'll see that this is our male model here, and that's his face, and then we have right symmetry, left symmetry. Now in this case, this is a bit, the symmetry here is a bit interesting because his face was totally in shadow on one side, or at least split light, use the split lighting enough to make a very visible difference here. And so we see, like, he's got his nose is kind of crooked, and his eyes are set lower than the other, and obviously in this case he was sort of corking his mouth a bit, but we can kind of see what happens when you put the two sides next to each other. So that's an example of one that we might use a little bit more sort of editing to the lighting. So we'll go on to the woman here, and we'll click on her, and we'll just do the same thing. In fact, what I can do here is this. I'm going to make a new layer here. I'm going to click back on the background, and I'm going to use my clone stamp tool. I'm going to press S on the keyboard, and I'm going to make this pretty big. I'm going to make this a pretty big brush. And what I'll do here is I'll just press the Alt key, and I'll set her target on her eye. And I'll come over here, and what I'll do is I'll make this layer invisible, and I'll start just painting one side of her face here. And that'll be good, right about there. And then what I'll do is I'll bring that back to visible, and I will, alright, I'll just right click, press the Marquee tool, and I'll just free transform, and I'll flip this horizontally. And I'll actually move this over slightly to where we can sort of position it on top of her face, like so. In this case, I have a bit more of information from her mouth, too. We can kind of see what's going on here. So I'll press the Enter key, and I'll use my eraser to get rid of some of this information over here. So you can kind of see what's... once again, we see this one side of her face is a bit more shadowed than the other. Just right there. Okay. And I'll just sort of get kind of base, base kind of idea of what she would look like if she were symmetrical on both sides. So once again, I'll just do this. And, okay. All right. So compare the two. All right. We'll save this. It's a PSD file first. And then we'll save this again by pressing File, Save As, and we'll save this as JPEG, and we'll call it woman, and we just copy the left side of her face, left symmetry. And we'll press save. Alright. And we'll just render this invisible, and we'll do the same thing to the other side of her face. So we can just do that same thing we did before. I'll use my stamp tool, I'll press the Alt key over her right eye, and I'll just start on this other side. I'll just start right here. I'll just paint around it in this new... Got it. And so what we'll do is we'll just render this invisible, just to see what we got here. And I'll click on this with the Marquee tool selected, and I will free transform, and I will flip horizontal. And what I'll do is I'll just drag this over to the other side so that I can't line up the nose a bit better. I'll press Enter, and in this case what I'll do is I'll take my eraser tool and I'll see if I can't kind of get rid of some of this stuff over this way. Try to even this out to make sure we kind of notice it's just her face. There we go. Her neck is a bit thinner here. I think I have too much information gone there. Actually, wait. There we go. Gotta start getting rid of these harsh edges here just so it blends better. And we'll just call that done right there. And if we wanted to, we could go back to the background layer. We could use the dodge tool here. Really make a background layer here. Duplicate this. It's okay. And I'll just use the dodge tool just to make this side of her cheek just a slight bit lighter. There we go. That looks good. Okay, so I'll just once again file, save as. And I can save this once again as a JPEG. And I will call this woman right symmetry. All right, I'll press OK. And what we can do now is we can view what we've got here. So I'll just press woman, and I'll just see we have the right symmetry, and we have the left symmetry. And see how that looks there. In this case, I think I put the left side of the face a bit too high, but it's okay. It looks like it's still even. So once again, we see even in these people who this woman is obviously some sort of model, and this man here is some actor of some kind. I'm not sure. And they're both both attractive people, but even we can see there that their faces aren't perfectly symmetrical. So no one's is perfectly symmetrical, and if they are, they tend to turn heads. It's one of those things that you don't notice, but your brain does. So this is an interesting little experiment. It's also a good way of learning about those free transform controls. In Photoshop, you can do all kinds of stuff with those free transform controls. If I have the Marquee tool selected, you can right-click on that, do free transform, and you can do all a number of things. You can, let me just I'll get rid of the background layers here. Do anything. For instance, you can skew, which is just grabbing it and slanting it one way or the other. You can have a perspective where like you look like the top is further away than from the bottom. You can adjust its, you can distort it by just changing the width and the height and just moving it around slightly. And then I think my favorite is the warp, which in which case you have different points that you can kind of move around. It's somewhat like the sponge tool, but just a little bit different. So you can kind of move that around as well. So the free transform tool is a very powerful tool that you can put into your little quiver. All right, so very good. So submit those, and your next task will be to take a picture of your partner, or if your partner's not done yet, someone else who's done. Take a portrait of them, just their face. If you have shoulders up, if you have some space at the top of their head, that's fine too. But this is essentially you're just going to take a picture of them, and then you'll submit both their photo and the left and right symmetry. Make sure the photo is well exposed, make sure the photo is well lit, make sure it's evenly lit. So something like butterfly lighting or something to that effect would work better than, say, split lighting. So make sure that their faces are sort of well lit on both sides. All right, so cannot wait to see you guys produce. Happy designing.